Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go. My name is Donald Kimball. I am the communications manager here at Washington Policy Center. Thanks so much for being with us. This, of course, is our series that takes place every other week where we bring you the latest in Washington policy throughout the state. We bring in our research directors so that you can hear from the experts on what is going on and what you need to know. The automated email that sent out earlier had last week's information, so apologies for that. That automated email didn't save the changes that happened. So we're not hearing from Todd or Chris this time. We are excited to have Liv Finne, our Center for Education Director, and Elizabeth New, our Center for Healthcare and Center for Worker Rights Director. We're going to be talking about some of the issues in Washington State and beyond for education and some of the stuff that's coming up for this next year, in particularly with labor with Elizabeth. But we're going to start with Liv. So welcome to the program, Liv. Thanks so much for being here.
Hello.
Hello. Excellent. Great to see you. So let's start with, the theme that seems to be the drum beating ever louder and ever clearer, which is school choice. It's picking up steam across the nation in various states. I think, was it Wyoming just signed one, and maybe Alabama? So there's all kinds of movement within the U.S., but that's not the only place that we're seeing school choice. In fact, we're seeing it in lots of places around the world. Why don't we start with what we're seeing in Argentina? And if you want to give us a little bit of background, what we know there.
Absolutely. It's so amazing. There's this new president there. Have heard about him. He has just passed a voucher program to help parents pay the cost of private school. And I just love the title from a Spanish language newspaper. And I'll just read it. Most people can understand this Spanish, but I thought it was so beautifully clear. It says, El gobierno launched el programa de vouchers, the program of vouchers, para ayudar, to help a cubrir la cuota de colegios privados, to cover the cost of private schools. What a beautiful concept, to help families cover the cost of private schools. This is now in Argentina. This is, of course, not new in South America. The country of Chile has had private school vouchers for some time. Only 52% of the students in Argentina in Chile actually attend traditional public schools. The rest are attending private schools. And the study has shown that the academic achievement in the publicly funded private schools is higher than in the traditional public schools. So that's a model that's been there for some time, the country of Chile. Now Argentina is going that way. In terms of other countries in South America that have vouchers, Colombia has a voucher program, and that's all that I have found so far in my research. But that's just South America. The countries of Europe have had voucher programs for some time, and it's quite interesting. The countries of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Ireland have constitutional provisions in their constitutions saying that parents have a right to publicly funded private school, which is so interesting. Because here in the United States, there's this horror claimed by defenders of the public system. We can't have vouchers, that it's not done anywhere, but it's not true. It's done in Europe and in large. So let me just read to you some percentages so that everybody knows that we're not just talking about small numbers of children in these countries going to publicly funded private schools. The proportion in Belgium is 58% of children using public vouchers to go to private school. In Denmark, 11%. In France, 16.8%. In the Netherlands, 76%, over 2/3 of the students in the Netherlands are attending private schools, publicly funded. In Spain, 24%. In the United Kingdom, 30%. And we're not just limited. And then Sweden, of course, that famous, I don't know, I don't have the number here in Sweden, but in Finland and Norway, they also have voucher programs. Portugal as well. So we're talking about most of Europe. Italy has a voucher program. So, and now India is promoting vouchers, as is Pakistan. And then, of course, in other parts of Asia, like South Korea, 21% of the students there attend a publicly funded private school. And in Australia, 25 of the children there are benefiting from a voucher program. So this is a common practice, and it reflects this sort of understanding, the fundamental understanding that parents know their children the best and can evaluate the best school environment for that is the best fit for their children. And when I first heard about this in Europe, I thought, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because in Europe you have different desires for sending your children to a school that promotes the values, that your religious values. And in Belgium, for example, most of the children are going to Catholic private schools, publicly funded, and this actually reduces the strife and controversy in society when parents can send their children to the schools that they feel tied to values wise. And so that's actually a benefit, instead of a detraction, as is often claimed here in the United States. So I find this incredibly exciting. To give parents power over the money will fix a lot of the problems, and the research has shown that this is happening in other countries. That when a public school system is which is typically not responsive to the desires of parents, and it's very difficult to hold public school system accountable for its failures to children. But when you introduce competition, what you see from the research in these other countries, you see the public systems become more responsive because they fear losing their students to private schools, and they are basically held accountable by the choices, the free and voluntary choices of parents. So what could be better? I mean, this is where we're headed. And unfortunately, here in Washington State, the hardliners, in power, defend the existing status quo, regardless of how poorly it serves the children. The children don't seem to matter. It's protecting the system, funding the system with more money, more programs. Is what is that's the only policy accepted by the current state legislature. So, I mean, during this last legislative session, one of the things that really struck me is that none of the leaders down there were talking about the pandemic learning loss that all the studies have shown is real, has inflicted real damage, academic damage to children, and mental and psychological damage in some cases to children. We've had an increased absenteeism that's a serious problem in the traditional public schools, yet we don't see any effort from the state legislature to give substantial sums of money to give children individual tutoring that they need to catch up from their pandemic learning loss. So that's what I really saw. They're trying to pretend it didn't happen as far as the state leaders are concerned. So, but meanwhile, the research goes on. The academics in places like Harvard, the Harvard School of Education, is that this Thomas Kane just issued a statement. He's been tracking and cataloging and providing the evidence of the loss in academic learning for students. And he's now saying that he's concerned that the schools are inflating grades in order to not tell parents that their children are actually behind, which is just another example of the problem we have, that we have incentives to lie to parents about where their children are in school. This is not working together to help the child get ahead in life. This is undermining the futures of children. And so I saw that recently, that he's got evidence showing that, and I believe it, because I've been seeing, because after COVID and during COVID, the state lowered the grading standards. There were no Fs allowed. You couldn't fail a class. They created different pathways for children to fulfill credits to graduate from high school. They lowered the standards for graduating. So, you're seeing this. They're lowered the standards for behavior in the schools. You're hearing all kinds of complaints, but yet nothing is done. People just complain. Nothing is done over and over and over again. I mean, when do people get tired of this? So that's why school choice is being driven with such force in these other states. It's very exciting.
And to that point, we have a question in the chat. And as a reminder, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, you can send them there. And so I'll send you this first one because it's kind of thematic there. So the question comes, so what do voters need to do here to get equal money for private schools? The state already supports private colleges, including some religious.
Yes. I mean, that is the fallacy in the arguments against it. We do provide public funding to send children to private preschools, private religious preschools, and we do, and at the other end of the scale, to private religious colleges. Okay, we provide Pell Grants to low-income families to send their children to any college of their choice, including religious colleges. So it's just this K through 12 set, in the middle, that is exempted from this kind of choice because of the power of the teachers union. Let's just be honest. So what can be done? Well, the best thing that can be done is to talk about it and say, look what's happening in Wyoming. They just passed a school choice law. It's a means tested law, but it's exciting. It gives every child under a certain income threshold access to private school with the help of the public. And and I'm going to write a report listing all the states, but we now have 11 states in the country that provide universal school choice to all the children in those states. And there are 32 states in total, plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, which have more limited school choice programs for needy subpopulations of students. So what can be done? This is a free country still. We still have a democracy. Speak to your legislators about this and spread the word. I mean, and think about, releasing the potential of educators. That's what I also see very interesting narrative happening at the same time. I read this article recently by Tom Lovelace, a very respected education researcher, criticizing the Common Core. Remember the Common Core? And what a failure that was. That was only 12 years ago. And that was based on the standards learning reform in the 1990s. And that is being shown to be a heavily regulated top-down system of trying to teach, require every school to teach every child the same thing across the country, which is a flawed model when you're talking about individual children with all the variety that they represent. And so what we're seeing now is a growth of innovative, small micro schools, talented teachers developing new models of teaching, independent of these bureaucratic top-down centralized school districts. And you're seeing this growth happen at the same time, and discussion about how we should toss aside this heavily regulated system of education in favor of allowing innovation and trial and new methods to really listen to the children, figure out what their strengths are, let them develop their strengths at the time, in the developmental sequence that's best for that child. I mean, that is what the true educators have been talking about for years, and they've been complaining about the over reliance on test scores, on this route, mechanized, standardized way of teaching every child, which of course anyone thinks about for 2 minutes and you realize it's not going to work, and it hasn't worked. And for 40 years we've been trying it. Now it's time to toss it in favor of a much more open-minded, much more free and liberal, truly liberal way to approach the education of children. So we're here. It's happening right now. I cannot actually believe it's happening so fast, but we can credit, that's part of the silver lining of the pandemic, closed schools. That's what's happened here. Everyone has had it with how the public school system treated parents and children.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to your earlier point as well, I think that in a year like we have with elections, making sure that, all the candidates know that this is a priority and that this is something that you want to make an issue, that is going to go a long way, as we saw with Texas, where school choice battle has been raging there for some years. And one of the very big motivating factors in their recent primary that happened was school choice. And certain legislators who voted against it got ousted in a lot of numbers. So
Yes.
To the point you're saying earlier, it is, I think, in particular in this year, bringing it up to both legislators, current legislators, as well as candidates, to make it an issue and to say, this is something we care about, can really go a long way.
Well, it's so interesting to be living in a state where this is so foreign, this idea that we make school choice a top priority when the governor of Texas, a governor with 5.5 million school children, Governor Greg Abbott, has said it's his top priority. Now, that is what I call leadership. I mean,
Yeah.
and there are other governors saying the same thing. The governor of Oklahoma, I can't remember all the governors, but there are a lot of governors, even governors I think it's Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, who's a liberal Democrat, said that school choice was a priority until he was shut down by the union there. However, he said it. It
Yeah.
came out of his mouth, and so um, if people are frustrated with the current system, why do they accept its continuance? That's what I don't get, right? Why are we just continuing to complain? Who is paying the price? It's the children. The children are paying the price. And I mean, Donald, one of the most exciting things I saw recently was 2 weeks ago, the New York Times admitted, and the New York Times, the champion of the lockdowns, okay, and closing the schools during COVID, has written an article, and I have a blog post coming out on it soon, and it admits that it was not necessary, that the science showed that it was not necessary to close the schools in the fall of 2020, right?
Right.
That was what was done because of the political pressure and lies and fear mongering put out there by the teachers union. And the New York Times has admitted this. Now, so when that happens,
The
something's changed,
the conversation is certainly shifting. Absolutely. Well,
you
let
know.
me get to some of our questions because we do have a couple here that are popping up. So, the first, will I co-sponsor a bill? Well, if you send me to the legislature, I would be happy to do that, but I'm I'm not there yet. Uh, let's see here.
Right.
So, there was a question about the WEA, the power of the unions, and yeah, I think that's been a major force opposing it, but even even in some places where unions exist, they will argue that, for instance, in Texas, that unions don't exist. They do. They're under a different name. They're sort of guised. It's a little bit like a wolf in sheep's clothing maybe situation, but they do exist. So even where the teachers union does have power, enough pressure put on the from parents and people who care, and citizen activists can move that conversation, I think.
Well, I think it's very significant that the union has been caught out in numerous lies regarding public education, and I think it's time to call them out for it. And let's not forget that in the fall of 2020, when the issue before the state was critical, do we reopen the schools that fall? The president of the WEA union, Larry Delaney, told John Carlson on his radio station that not to worry, we have to keep the schools closed. The children won't get behind because they'll all be behind. Okay, now that was a lie because there were many states that were run by Republican governors that were reopening, and so the children in those schools were not going to be behind like the children in Washington schools would be. So that was, and then that. So I just think the time, and so I don't think we should be afraid of the union as much as we were before, is what I'm saying. They hurt the children, and it's incumbent upon us to protect the children from a union that makes decisions that hurts children. So it's as simple as that. And the evidence. I'm not making this up. Okay, the union hurt the children during COVID. Everybody knows it. It lost a reputation as a result of that, and you know, anyway, I don't know quite what else to say about that, except that everybody knows that the union is in Washington state has blocked the growth of charter schools, which are successful schools for low-income children. That to me is a disgrace, and it's maintaining a policy of discrimination against charter schools, a policy of funding discrimination. So children who choose to go to charter schools get less for their education than children that don't. That is just outrageous, and that's because of the union here. The union has blocked school choice proposals every year that they're brought forth by courageous legislators. They block those in the committee. That's wrong. That's a wrong thing to do. And then the union blocks reforms to the system within, the system of traditional schools, like the hiring and firing of young teachers. It's
Yeah.
all seniority based. We That's wrong itself. We can't get effective teachers in every classroom because teachers have tenure. So these are longstanding grievances that people have against the teachers union, but nothing's ever done about that, except that now. So and then the disproportionate political power that the union has in Washington state over other issues.
Hmm.
So if school choice is the solution to this, because if money goes from the taxpayers to the parent to a private school, then it won't go to the public schools, and then the union won't have as much power because it's using its power there to deduct dues from teachers' paychecks, and this is all a corrupt, self-serving system.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
No,
that's
I
kind of long-winded, I know.
no, no,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right. It is a cycle that sort of feeds into itself. So if we can break that cycle, then we really do give parents the choice there. We got two more questions I want to get to real quickly, and then there's a third that I'll respond that's not directly for education. So I'll take that. But the first, would these vouchers include classical Christian schools that are popping up in the state?
Yes, yes. As long as it's an accredited school, any school, any accredited private school could receive money that a parent decides to send to it. Yes, that's the way it's being set up.
Yeah, and
Yes.
as you have pointed out in your writings, this is already a legal precedent with the Supreme Court ruling that has essentially made that legal or reaffirmed its legality and overturned, was it the Blain Amendments in
Yes,
Washington?
the
Is that
Blain
right?
Amendment. Yes, the Blain Amendment. There have been three U.S. Supreme Court cases that have basically invalidated the Blain Amendment in Washington State's Constitution that would prohibit money going to a private sectarian school. Uh, those are gone.
Yeah.
That Blaine Amendment's gone. It's a relic of our bigoted past. So that can't be used. Although they will try. Of course, defenders of the system will try, but to use it, but it's not valid.
Yeah.
So
Well, and of course, the brief thing I always like to mention when it comes to people worried about funding a religious school, public schools aren't without their own perspective too. People tend to think just because someone is religious, that means they have a view that a non-religious institution doesn't. Every institution has a worldview, has an epistemology, and so the question is, where is that coming from, right?
and absolutely, and now it's gotten much worse since COVID. Once again, the DEI ideology, the diversity, equity, and inclusion ideology that was put in the public schools in 2021 by the Governor Inslee and the state legislature, that is an ideology
Yep.
similar to a cult. And it teaches that children are bad because of the color of their skin. Depending on what your color is, you're labeled some bad name, oppressor or oppressed. That's not good. Okay.
Yep.
And this has to be defunded. And this is in the public schools. And I consider it dangerous. It's not even a positive, it's a destructive and nihilistic religion that now attempts to separate parents from their children, and the option. This is part of the reason why 46,000 families have pulled their children out of the public schools. They don't want their children taught this harmful, false teaching. And so anyway.
So here's the last thing that I think you'll be able to tackle on here. This is less of a direct question for you, but some really good data pointed out here. So here's a question for Washington residents and voters. Why do we spend $18,175 per student in Washington and achieve a high school graduation rate of 91.7% when Idaho spends $7,833 per student and achieves a graduation rate of 91.3%? Taxpayers in Washington are spending $10,342 for a graduation rate of 0.4% more than Idaho. Methinks we need to take a look at how we manage education. Something is terribly wrong.
Yes, it truly is. If you look, okay, so I've studied the staffing. Okay, between 83 and 85% of spending in the public schools is spent on the cost of pay and benefits for the staff employed by the schools. So if you examine the categories of staff, I found out that only about 50% of the total 125,000 people that are employed in Washington public schools are actually classroom teachers, 50%. And if you translate that to numbers, depending on what report you use, that cost is between 53 and 60% of every dollar. Okay.
Yep.
So that tells you right there what's happening. And other researchers have shown this to be true, is that we've been hiring non-teachers, staff outside the classroom at a faster clip than we've been hiring teachers for some time. And so and so it's extremely unfair to teachers when you think about it, because it means that the best teachers can't be given bonuses for their great work in the classroom, because other staff that are not certified teachers, not teaching children, are being hired at a faster clip than they are being
Yep.
rewarded for their pay. So this yeah, I don't know the specifics of Idaho, but it doesn't surprise me that Idaho spends a lot less money and gets just as good a results as
Right.
Washington State.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Liv. I really, really appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much. Bye
Before we
bye.
get to Elizabeth, I'm going to respond to one question here, which was I emailed my representative regarding the AI task force. She has responded telling me that it is very prescriptive as to who will be on the task force and is asking who else I think should be on the task force. As far as our thoughts, my general disposition would be to have industry leaders specifically because my thought is that they are very much going to put a lot of people on there who have one kind of view. And so people in that industry, specific names aren't on the top of my head, but if you wanted to suggest someone like, I don't know, Todd Myers from the Washington Policy Center, I think he would have a lot of good things to write about and say. But maybe I'm a little bit biased there.